Good. Good morning. Let me go ahead and kick this off. I appreciate everybody coming. Welcome to today's High Point Historical Society's educational program, Ladies Who Lead, High Point Educational Pioneers. My name is Julie Rayner, and I'm here wearing two hats today. I am a past president of the Historical Society, and I am the chair of the library's 100th anniversary planning committee. So this is a program in both of those for those purposes. And I want to welcome you on behalf of the Historical Society and the High Point Public Library. Just a little bit about the Historical Society, if you didn't know. The Historical Society collects, preserves, and showcases the history of Greater High Point to foster a shared appreciation of our community, reflected in the stories, events, and traditions of our past. And if you're interested in learning more about it, we've got some information at the back table, so feel free to take a look at that before you go. We also have some information about the library's anniversary events coming up. We're also collecting stories. So if you visited the library or have memories or stories you'd like to share, I have some story cards back there. So feel free to fill one out while you're here. We've got some swag for the anniversary sale, all kinds of big advertisements. Some of our programs that are coming up in the next few months as well. All right. Today, help me welcome our panelists, Mary Ann Hepler, who was the final president of the High Point Women's Club, Raven Jefferson, who is the founding executive director of High Point Schools Partnership, and Vicki Miller, who's worn several hats as well, retired principal from Guilford County Schools and founder of Community Collaboration for Children. Please join me in welcoming them. All right. So where are we now? Okay. I will now invite y'all to kind of share your background a little bit and any connection you have to or your roles within your organization, any connections you have to educational institutions in general and the High Point Public Library in particular, or whatever else you'd like to share to introduce yourself.
Starting
with you, Mary Ann.
I'm Mary Ann Hepler. I was born in High Point, raised in High Point, graduated from High Point College back then, and I was president of the High Point Women's Club until it disbanded. We made it through our 100th anniversary, and the Women's Club did a lot civically for this town of High Point, which you'll hear about as the day goes on. We were the oldest civic club in High Point and did a lot to found the library and the museum and the YWCA and a lot of other groups around town. Women back in those days usually did not have a career, and they put themselves into developing their town for their children. And they influenced their husbands to open their pocketbook to give money, which helped pay on all the things that the women were interested in, which is what happened with the library and the museum and the YWCA, etc., which we'll talk about. I have 3 children, 6 grandchildren, so I'm interested in education, continue to be, even though I'm retired. I was an interior designer in town, perfect town for that, for that career. But I also taught at GTCC the design courses at night. So I have other interests besides history, but that was my major in college before design was history. So I love anything historical to do with the museum and every other part of High Point. I think that's enough.
I'm Vicki Miller. I grew up in Charlotte. Actually was contacted about a month ago by my first grade music teacher. Now think about that. That means, I'm telling my age, 71 years ago. She had found the letter I wrote to her in 1976 where I wanted her to know that I had grown up always wanting to be a music teacher like her. I had some serious family issues going on at the time in first grade, and I had a serious stutter and a lisp, and I was mocked in the classroom for not being able to say present. Yeah, but I did really. You couldn't just say here; you had to say present, and of course the P's wouldn't come out. Anyhow, she chose me to play two-finger chopsticks when the older students sang at Christmas. A song called Christmas Chopsticks, and there was one interlude, and I got to play. So when I became a teacher in 1970, I wrote her a letter in 76. I found her in Boone, or I thought I found her, and so I sent her a letter and just thanked her. She was busy raising kids, running a ski resort up there with her husband. She tucked it away in the Bible, found it about 4 or 5 months ago, did Google searches, found me. And I wrote in the end of first grade, those little papers you fill out, what's your favorite color? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a teacher like Miss Smith so I can help children like me. And we drove up there and saw her in Boone about 3 weeks ago. The doors were open. It was a beautiful day. She was playing God Bless America on the organ that's in her house, 93 years old, using both keyboards, 2 hands, and playing the pedals. I have pictured a movie of her playing, but she was playing God Bless America, because here comes the little Miss Vicky. So I've always wanted to be a teacher, always wanted to be in education. I was a music teacher like her, but I did more in the character ed. Every program we gave had character ed emphasis. I led program at Ferndale for 20 years on building character in students. And I've been real involved since then, trying to help families that were like me get the help they really need instead of people dismissing them. There is a whole lot of, I don't know, antagonistic opinions or feelings towards the least of these. And you want to get me going, be ugly to one of the least of these, because they're such leaders in education. So, and the women's club, I met Mary Ann towards the final years of their existence, and she'll probably share, if she doesn't, I will later, how that fed into what I have done since that point in time. And this is a Reagan. Oh, and she's the mayor's wife, just in case.
Thank you, Vicki. Good morning, everyone. As Vicki mentioned, my name is Raymond Jefferson, and I am the founding executive director of the High Point Schools Partnership as of February 1. Now, we have existed way before that. We were established in 2019 with a group of local community stakeholders, and it was during an election period, and this is only from what I was told, because I was not involved at the moment, and Vicki was there, because she was certainly a part of that group of stakeholders who played a part in that. So thank you for that. But at the time it was election year, and they felt like local officials who were running for these positions weren't talking enough about our schools and how we can make impact in our schools, right? And so that's how the High Point Schools Partnership came about. We started with a few key signature events, and we have grown since then to make huge impact in our community. And so we believe that it is our duty to galvanize our High Point community around the support of our schools to better our opportunities for our students in our community. And that is exactly what we do. We can talk a little bit more about that later, which I'm sure will come up. But for me personally, I am a young professional, and so the entirety of my career has been in education nonprofit. I started off as a student support specialist at the school in which I attended, born and raised in High Point as well, at Welcome Middle School. So right around the corner, I was a student support specialist for several years. Took a small hiatus during COVID, and then came right back into this role. Well, not this role, but with the High Point Schools Partnership. And so just like Vicki, I am someone who has benefited greatly from the contributions of my community and from those who worked in my public schools and supported me throughout my childhood, being raised by a single mother on Section 8, but still had a village around me. And so it were those individuals in my family and my community and within our schools who made sure I had access and exposure to know what I could achieve and possibly be. So I am a first generation college graduate because I went on college tours while I went in those schools and had those individuals who encouraged me to achieve and do more. And so that's part of the reason why I believe, similar to these ladies here, why I should give back to my community. And I will always be in the role of service and will always be an advocate for education. I'm still figuring out what I want to be when I grow up, but it will always entail something that has to do with giving back to education, to youth, and to my community. So I'm grateful to be here.
All right, thanks, ladies. Go ahead and start with some questions. Start with Mary Ann. How did the Women's Club of High Point's early leadership set the stage for the public library and local education in general?
The Women's Club was founded in, I'm going to look at 1909. It was a reading club. And they decided that we needed a civic club in High Point. So they began the Women's Club. The first president was Miss B.E. Moore, 1901 and 1911. She was president. During the First World War, they sold Liberty bonds. They sold $157,950 worth of Liberty bonds and canned 40,000 quarts of fruits and vegetables. It was taken 500 pounds of dried fruit and collected clothing for Armenia, Syria, and Belgium. My whole little girl life, I said, the poor Armenians. Did you all ever hear that? I'm sure there are other countries now that we say that about. Under Miss Clara Cox, that was Clara Cox Apartments in the old name. She was president 1916, 1918, and the club secured the first city health nurse. They're responsible for securing the appointment of the first juvenile judge, Mr. Marr. This was very gratifying to the social service department. They sold Red Cross seals and dispersed bulletins on combating tuberculosis. They're responsible for securing a psychometrician for the local health clinic in 1952. The club volunteered for cancer control and preparation of cancer dressings, 1950, 1960. In 1917, they started the first PTA. They founded the first library in High Point by collecting donations from 10 prominent businessmen, and the checks are $500 each. And if you go to the library, they're hanging on the wall, and I haven't seen it lately. I assume they're still hanging on the wall, the original 10 checks.
They're in the Heritage Research Center in the frame. So just, that's on the second floor. So definitely.
Those men were the husbands of the women in the Women's Club. So you can see the pillow talk at night. Honey, don't you want to give some money? So that's what happened. $500 a piece. Let's see. PTA, library. They founded the first YWCA in High Point. Members put off raising money for the clubhouse. They had already started collecting money for the clubhouse and decided that the YWCA was more important. So they gave the clubhouse money to be the foothold for the Y. They helped establish the High Point Arts Council. They began the High Point Historical Museum. They were on the staff of the Little Red Schoolhouse, where it was located on Ray Street before it was moved to the museum grounds. Mrs. C.G. McIntosh was president from 60 to 63, and she was appointed chairman for the dedication of the new museum and helped in the arrangements for the program. Then there's something in here about money that you don't need in this. But they helped establish the Shakespeare Festival. So that was our past. It was very important to have a museum, the YWCA, um, anything involve children, especially, was important to the Women's Club. And they continually raised money up until our 100th anniversary, where we all wore period clothes. That was a lot of fun. We met, the mayor came, the city council came, other civic groups met in our clubhouse on Johnson Street, the Lions Club, other groups. So we opened our clubhouse not only to the Women's Club, but to other civic groups. Plus, the public could use that building for weddings and receptions and funeral receptions and all kinds of things. But our club volunteered at nursing homes, in schools. We gave programs. We were always involved in anything civic to enhance our community. The city council was not always behind what the women wanted to do. We were more progressive than these husbands. So it was up to I'm so glad it's all women. I'm not criticizing men who aren't here, but they wanted to not give the money for different things, to start the library, to start the museum, and that they wanted to use the money for everything. And the women said, no, this is important for our community. So we stood up for what we believed in and eventually got all the things we wanted in the town. And always helped the schools, always. We had all kinds of fundraisers and involved the children in the different activities that we had, along with the other civic clubs that met with us. They did too. The Lions Club was important. But we sponsored educational programs and always have.
Thank you. I may jump around with the questions a little bit, just so you know. So we talked last month about the Washington Street branch of the library, and Mary Ann and Reagan, I don't know what experiences you had with that, but what are your, or anybody really, what are your feelings about how that opening that branch, how did that represent a pathway for learning for High Point's Black community? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the Women's Club first met down on Washington Street. They were very involved in the education of all children. So I think it was important from the very beginning for the Women's Club to always sponsor anything for children. So they did.
I wasn't a member of the Women's Club. I moved to High Point when I remarried, and that was in 1994. But the very first thing I heard about High Point was those women. And they were described as those women thing and the Women's Club, because if anything was going to happen in High Point that was good and focused on children and education, it was going to be from the Women's Club. So I'm sitting here, some of the things you said I had no idea about, but how progressive they were. And you go back and think about those days and the major factories that were here and the men that ran those factories. And most of them have passed on and their wives have passed on. But I was fortunate enough to meet a lot of them, the Slanes, the Millicents, the Condons, and their legacy still goes on in High Point through foundational pots of money that they give through their children. So I'm sitting here suddenly awed by what you ladies and the ladies before you did, because I don't know, we need to know some of the tactics they use in that Pillars office. It doesn't work with me as well. But yeah, influencing the men to the extent that they did to get their hands on the money, because women we didn't have resources back then. Everything was relying on the man. So it's very, very impressive. But as far as the Washington Street, that is where the hub of the African American community was and still is to a great extent through Wayne Penn. I was part of the refurbishing of the theater back, I guess, 30 years ago or something there. I don't know anything about the library at that point, but I do know that if it hadn't been for the women's club, I doubt that would have happened, you know? So,
I too am in awe of what I'm learning in real time with you all, especially about the Washington Street Branch Library. I honestly did not know about it prior to Julie sending the question over. And so I have taken it upon myself personally to go learn more about it, participating in the Washington Street Historical Tour in 2 weeks just for that reason. Just so I can learn more about that. And I guess I'm surprised that I don't know about it because I grew up partially on Washington Street. My grandfather has owned a business since I was born on Washington Street that's still there. It's Rock's Auto Body Shop. And so I spent a lot of the afternoons and summers riding up and down Washington Street and had no idea of the historical context, especially, I know about Ben Griffin, but not about the library itself. But in doing some research about it, and just understanding broadly the power that libraries have in communities. You all know this, that libraries create access to educational and research references and resources that, are good for the students that were at school at the time, but also an opportunity for those who were in the community. It created a community hub within the schools. And for the school's sake, that creates a level of appreciation for the school, even if you don't have a student in school, which is something we're constantly trying to preach at the High Point Schools Partnership, because we do believe that great communities have great schools, and without one, you cannot have the other, right? And so how did you create buy-in into supporting education and supporting schools for those who no longer are in school or have a student in school? You make it a place valuable for the community to still engage. And that's exactly what that library did. It created resources for those students, but also for the community members who did not have access to a library in general due to Jim Crow segregation. And so having that access to the library and those resources, of course, we know gives access to knowledge, and knowledge is power. And so I'd imagine at that time it was an incredible resource to the, like I said, the students at Ben Griffin, but also those individuals in the community who may have sought to further their own education when they couldn't get into the local colleges and community schools, or to advance their own careers who were denied apprenticeships or access into other career fields, right? And so at that time, those people were certainly building their own communities due to segregation and other things. And so although I was not there and don't know too much about it, and just learned about it, but I'm sure that museum created a window and access of power and knowledge for those individuals in that community where else it was denied.
We have a recording from the Washington Street program on the museum's Facebook page. So we're going to be adding it to the library's page very soon as well, along with the timeline for the history for the Washington Street branch. So we're looking for that. So information about the website, that kind of thing, is on the back table. If you want to look at that before you go. Another topic, the public libraries are sort of known for being in a building. But at High Point, there have been several versions of a book bundle that has gone out to serve the communities in High Point. We had our first one in 1957. And I'm not sure, I couldn't quite find out how long that lasted, but I know it went out to neighborhoods. I've seen, the routes that it took in the newspaper articles. And then again, it was revitalized in 2001. There was a grant and they received the Books and Beyond bookmobile. And we hung on to that vehicle for a long time, got it recovered. And after that point, we actually have a new vehicle and passed it along to Growing High Point. And so they use that as their mobile pantry vehicle. But anyway, just sort of in general, what are your thoughts about the importance or the role that libraries would play going out in the community from your own experience?
I know.
I didn't have a lot of experience. I knew it was there, but the bookmobiles, I knew they went out. But my mother was so good about taking us to the library all the time. We had our cards early and we checked out all the time. And if they had educational programs in the library, she would take us to take part in the educational programs. My whole family believed in education. So I knew I knew it was out there and went out into the community, which is very important because a lot of people didn't have mothers like I had. They took us not only to the library, you remember when it was next to the old Wild Main Street, South Main Street, and in the back was Oscar's hot dog house, and we'd get books and we'd go get a hot dog and go. But a lot of mothers didn't have a way. When I was a child in the 50s, most families were one car families if you had a car. And so the husband, but most always, was the one that took the car and went to work. And the housewife, my mother, stayed home, no car, unless he came home to eat lunch. And she could run, go to do something and come back. And her parents wouldn't even allow her to drive. My daddy didn't teach her to drive. So I grew up in the primitive days when women couldn't do much, but my mother did the best she could to get me to the library. And a lot of people didn't even have that. So it was important for people that couldn't go to the library, they had the library come to them. I think it's always been important in every community. They have that outreach program. And when you can't go to one spot, they come to you. I think that's not only for the library, I think it's important for the museum too. And they have so many educational programs here for children to come if they can, which I wish there was more mobility so that people could use our museum, the library, the Y, other things in town that are important to everybody.
I'll only add to that, not much has changed from the 50s. You go right across the street and you go about 10 square miles on that side of High Point. You go about 3 miles or 2.5 miles this way for about 10 miles. You got a bunch of people that do not have transportation. They still don't have transportation. And it with the way our world is right now and has been for the last 20 years, now they're going to have transportation because of the expense of cars and gas and upkeep and insurance and all of that. We don't have a good transportation system in High Point. And I know our city leaders are aware of that. There are a lot of factors. They can't find people to drive the buses. But I've lived here for 30 years. I grew up in Charlotte, was in Gradesburg, attended college, and settled there, and then moved to Eiffel. If you don't take it to them, they're not going to answer. And I know when I was principal over at Parkview, which is about 2.5 miles from here, our kids loved when the bus came, and they'd go in, and when they walk back with books, they would hold it like this, because that was their book that they had picked out, not somebody in a classroom that said, "Here, you can read this." So I don't know anything more specifically, but I can tell you, going to where the need is still a very viable, needed option for the library. You say it now, they'll say, okay.
Well, thank you for that.
Be sure and tell Cyril to work on that transportation.
That's
top.
something that we take really seriously is reaching the folks that if we understand the transportation issue and that we have not only one but two mobile vehicles that go out. We now have a technology vehicle that goes out into the community as well. So, and gives people help with all kinds of things that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. So it continues to be a priority for the library as well. Good. So, switching gears a little bit, what, in your opinion, do you think are the most urgent educational needs facing High Point families today? I don't know if Rita want to start with that and
Try.
you want to.
Yeah. Well, I taught for 20 years at Ferndale and then was principal at Parkview. Um, it's just the greatest educational concerns. And I'm just going to say it. There is no reading program. There is no math program that has ever been created or will ever be created that's going to dramatically impact scores in our schools. Ever. It never will happen unless that child walks in that building every day ready to learn. If they're not ready to learn, I used to watch my teachers get there at 6:30, 6:15 in the morning and stay to 5 o'clock at night, trying to create creative, interactive lessons for my students. We'd walk down the halls. I always saw excellent teaching going on. But what I saw when I unloaded the buses every morning are fists, just bound up like that. I hug every child, touch every child every morning because they were coming from home situations where they were faced with, they're getting ready to be evicted. They had witnessed violence or heard violence in the neighborhood. They heard police sirens. Sometimes their families were involved. Lack of nutritional food. There might be something in the cupboards. They could go to the food pantry, but you can only eat so many cans of beanie weenies, green beans, and corn. And they'd be hungry. And they come to school in the morning angry. I don't know that they would have defined it as angry, but just tied up from the toxic stress they did. So every day we have students entering the building, even now, all the work that the Women's Club has done and all that the library has done, all that education has done, who are just not ready to sit there and learn. Best way to explain it is if you go out in the morning and you've got to be at something and you got to start your car and it doesn't work. You know that thing that comes over you, that panic, that anxiety, and it's like your whole day is now going to be messed up because your car won't work. Well, children that live in toxic stress, where it's related to poverty, where it's related to health, where it's related to not having the basic needs, toilet paper. You can't get toilet paper with food stamps or what they call a SNAP. You can't buy that with that. I mean, can't buy personal items if you're a female with those items. The people that have to live without, they face that toxic stress every day. So my challenge that I still see in education is getting out there as a community in collaboration with other groups. What can we do to improve the living conditions in High Point for everyone? Holding people accountable, but still making sure the services get particularly to the children so they have a chance.
Perfect segue. Thank you, Vicki, for that. I agree with Vicki, right? There's many methods of which you can address education and the needs of students. And the end all be all is that we need students to come to school and they are ready to learn. Our schools certainly do a lot of good work, as Vicki said, and she was also a part of, do a lot of good work in the classrooms to be innovative and to make sure that students, the curriculum is relevant and that they are engaged in their learning. But can you accomplish much if they don't show up? And if they show up, and are they in the right mindset and ready to learn? And so how do we approach the root of the concern regarding the students' willingness to learn and addressing the whole needs of the student? And that's where this community school model comes into play, where you are providing the resources to meet the whole need of the student and the family to make sure that the educational time is optimized and the most efficient, right? Because you can't teach a hungry kid to learn because all I can hear is my stomach rumbling. And so what are those community resources that we can put in place to support students? And just same way with the mobile library, you have to meet them where they are. Where are most of the youth in our community, in our public schools? So if we want to affect drastically our future, our workforce, our economy, invest in our children. And investing in our children can look like several things. But one thing I always like to bring up, because a lot of people feel like it's out of our reach and it's out of our hands, it's not. Voting is one of the simplest ways to do that. Making sure that we have representation and electing people who believe in fully funding our schools. And what does fully funding look like? It's making sure that our teachers have adequate pay to be in these roles. It is making sure that our buildings are crumbling and our children aren't sitting underneath molded ceilings. It's making sure that the funding is flexible enough for the schools to be able to take care of the needs that they know are needed for the population they're serving. Right? We know that schools that are Title I schools get a little extra funding to support those students, but it's heavily restricted. It's not meeting the needs. It's just like the SNAP program, right? It may be providing food, but who's taking care of the toilet tissue? And so there are a lot of unmet needs for the students and the families in our schools that are preventing their ability to learn and retain that knowledge and to be able to take it into the next phase of life. And so if we can meet the whole needs of the student by making sure that we fully fund our schools and then also providing community resources to help fill the gaps in the meantime and between time, we can certainly make sure that students come to school and are ready to learn. So I think that is certainly one of the biggest issues that we're facing in education is the defunding of our education that's not keeping up with the pace of our economy and our society. We often hear we're number one in business, but we're 43rd in school investment and teacher pay. It's backwards. And as I said, mentioned before, it is almost impossible to make sure that our community is thriving if we don't take care of the future. And what is the future? Majority of which are in our public schools. And so making sure that our schools have exactly what they need to be able to support the students and families so that they can learn when they arrive in the school buildings.
Okay, Ned. They were both wonderful.
Just one other question before we move to the audience questions. So thank you all for that. That is confirming what I thought, almost my thoughts. With the priorities for education at High Point, how can you visualize how the library could contribute to helping to meet some of those needs? What ideas do you have? If any,
Let's find a bunch of women who come together through, the library always has been, it was built on the back of a women's club. And we just have to start making some demands. Like I said, I don't know what kind of pillow top you like. It doesn't work real well. It's worked with you?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Still with no transportation.
No, but I'm serious about, I think we have been quiet for too long. I think women moved into roles of their own, being in business, moving up the career ladder and, breaking that ceiling and being active and productive in what they wanted to accomplish. And then still being a wife and a mother to children, I think they don't have enough time and energy to be more wrapped in being changers within a community, which the women's club did. They changed the city. So I think maybe the library could take a bold approach and let's identify one or maybe two. Like I used to tell people in my school, a child that you would see in the office, principal's office, having trouble. Holy terror in the classroom. Get them into my office, calm them down, be a child you want to take home and adopt. I mean, just a wonderful child. But the stressors that they had to deal with, something could trigger them off just like that. Okay. So if we could, as women, identify, I would say 4 or 5 stressors in a child's life going on. I could tell you what they are. I won't spend that time. But the schools could work on 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, to kind of get that kid headed on the right path. But if these other 2 weren't dealt with, they were strong enough to undo the good that was being done in the other 3. But if the library could call together women, leaving men out of it, the men gunk it up with too much of theoretical business sense, bring in the women who have the emotion to really make a difference. And let's just focus on 1 or 2 of the greatest impactful reasons that children are struggling in our schools, because that's how we know the health of our community. It's what's going on in the public schools. These are not bad kids. They're not. They just are reacting to what the adults have put them in. And so let's identify 1 or 2, and then as a female-driven initiative, we do what the Women's Club. We find a way to address that in an impactful way. You've said it before, go to where the kids are instead of saying, wait, now you got to come here and then we'll work with you. There's some nonprofits doing that. The one that I founded during COVID, we go wherever the family is, and we look at the family unit as a whole, and we try to identify the things that are causing this family to struggle. And then we know how to get them out of it. We got a pathway for them to do it. They just have to be willing. But they have to know you're in it for the long haul with them, because they're going to falter. So I think the library could talk to Mary Ann and a few of the other Women's Club members that are still here. And what was it that drove that initiative? Because it obviously worked.
You hear what she said. It's the women that get anything done. It has always been that. You go back to the Bible, look behind some of these men. It's the women that do it. We're the backbones, but we can't say that because we hurt egos out there. You know what I'm talking about. But women are the ones that have to get together in groups, whether it's the museum or the library or the Y or any other group. It's the women that get together and talk real close together and decide what needs to be done and then take it out there to get it done. We're the movers and the shakers. We just can't talk about it.
Right.
We're still not allowed, even after women's lib and all that. And I'm 79 years old, they still can't talk about it. It's the women that get anything done. We have to stand behind these women's groups, no matter how small they are. We're the ones that have the children, and you know how painful that is. You get them into the world, you want everything wonderful for them, whether it's the education or the church or the community. You want it for your children, even more than the fathers do. They're good fathers. I'm not saying men are bad, but it's the women that bring up the children and do it right. We can have careers, but we still have homes. And it's the women that center that home. We always have been. We always will be. We just have to recognize it and do it. You are very wise.
Well, and I know my husband is an incredible leader, but a lot of times, and even around the things that I do, I don't talk about to him, because then I begin to hear all the what ifs, or you can't, or that would never. And whenever I've just taken something and gone with it, I don't always do it right. I call it tweaking. You do something, and then if that doesn't work, you tweak it. If the goal and the idea is good and right, and it's focused on improving the lives of children, which is everything that this group did, look like can happen. I'm sure there were naysayers about having a library back in the day,
Oh, yeah.
but it's still here. So, all right, Ray, and you're on the young one here. I said,
I'm gonna attempt to maybe offer a suggestion. I think this will throw me for a loop. I don't know if it was on there, so I've got an idea, but this is me brain blending out loud. Give me the grace. We're gonna tweak it. We're gonna tweak it. But the power of the High Point Schools partnership is our ability to create those partnerships. We often play the liaison or the matchmaker or the broker in relationships for our schools and connecting them with the community, right? And so we have these established relationships with school staff. We're frequently in our schools, hearing what their needs are, and also gathering intel on what is going really well in our schools so we can help highlight that in the community, but also gathering what their needs are. And we're at events like this, or we're at different networking events and community events, meeting different individuals, advocating for those needs, and meeting those partners who have the potential and the desire and the resources to possibly support the needs of those students and those educators in those schools. And so partnership is our power, and that connective power that we have. And so that's where my brain automatically goes, thinking about the library, and with you all's efforts of creating a joy around education and learning through literacy. And so how can that play in some of the schools? And one thing that we preach is, of course, we talked about meeting them where they are, but in our power of partnership, we try to make sure that resources are maximized and used to their most efficient ability. And we also don't rush a school. Where are they? What are their priorities currently? And how can we address what their current needs are instead of, and this is a real life example, someone dropped off a box of socks when I worked at Welver. I had no need for a box of socks. Did not know what to do with a box of socks, but had to find the need just to preserve the relationship with the person who, or the organization that dropped them off. But those socks probably could have been better used at another institution, right? And so that's where we try to help figure out where those resources can be best utilized. And so thinking about the library, there are several schools. Welborn, as an example, last year we hosted an event there. Their librarian, they were fired up about some of the programs they have going on. It's called Dating a Book. It was a blind date with a book, where they wrap a book and lay it out on the table. These are brand new books. We know the excitement that comes with a brand new book. And students would pick up the book and read it, or pick up the book blindly and then basically go on a date with that book, and they would read that book not knowing what it is that they had chosen, but ultimately falling in love with that book, not judging a book by its cover, of course, not knowing what they were getting into. And so we have librarians within our schools who are fired up and have these different innovative ideas that engage students and encourage them and inspire them to read and be excited about reading. And so maybe partnering with our different librarians, I don't know if you've ever gotten the librarians from the schools together about some of the needs that they may have, right? There's another school, I think it was Parkview, they have a need for culturally relevant stories and books within their media center because they serve a very diverse population of students. And so how do we provide them with the books that they need that will engage their student groups? And so thinking about convening those groups of librarians and seeing what their needs are, and the library helping to provide those resources and meeting those students where they are. And these are just tactics. Like I said, there are many methods to get to the end goal of educating students. But what does that look like then if those programs or those incentives of books are encouraging students to show up at school? And now it's a means of decreasing chronic absenteeism for students who didn't show up before, right? And so how do we use the tools and the resources in our areas of interest or expertise to meet the end goal, which is going to be educating our students and making sure they're prepared to go out to the real world to provide for themselves and their families and contribute to our communities?
Thank you for that. I know that our children's librarian has a relationship with a lot of the schools in the community, but I suspect that as another institution of education, part of our mission is to share what we're doing. I don't know how much of inviting that has been done. So I mean, that's an idea. I'd be happy to share that with our children's library. I know she would be open. She's very open to outreaching in the community. So
Way to help.
yeah, great discussion, great thoughts, ladies. Thank you so much. Do you all have any questions for our panelists?
What percentage of the school principals nowadays are women? And in High Point City Schools, do we know if is the first woman principal was? And yeah,
I wouldn't venture to guess. There is a book that was published. I'm sure it's in the library. It's the history of the High Point Public Schools before we became a part of Gilbert County Schools. And I'm sure the first female principal would be listed in there. I didn't live in High Point until 1990, early 1990. I could tell you who it was in Greensboro, but I couldn't tell you here and none. And I would say probably there's 25, 26 schools, public schools in 940. I would say it's probably 60-40 female to male majority. Yeah, majority female. Yes, yeah.
And I think you're right. I think visiting the Heritage Research Center at the library would be a good first step in finding that out, because that was one of the sort of side trips for the history of the library I've been looking at here recently that I decided not to go down, just because I think that I was trying to get sort of an overall history of the library. But the history of High Point Public Schools would also be a really compelling topic to address for our future historical society program.
That would be a good one, because there were some obvious inequities back in the 30s, 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. I was in a school that was affected by some inequity. And I'm not sure that the High Point schools have completely caught up yet. So that would be a very interesting program or series of programs.
Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. Let's join me in thanking our panelists today.
Thank you.